If you weren't born yesterday, you probably know what AI is. And if you're an artist, you definitely do. And I'm probably 2 seconds away from clicking off the video unless I tell you I'm on your side. I'm an artist too. So before we begin, yes, I did make an AI, but it's trained on only my own work. I didn't use a base model. I need to get that out of the way, because despite how big of a technological advancement it is, AI has some major flaws. This all started when I had to address a social issue for a project at university. For this project, I had to create 2 media outputs that would form a campaign. For my topic, the first thing that jumped out at me was AI. It might not be the most life-threatening or widespread social issue there is, and many people probably don't think it's a social issue at all. But you can't deny the impact it's had on our current culture and how it's shaken the art community to its core. Before I get into my AI creation process, you guys have to understand that 2 to 3 months ago, I didn't know anything about AI, nothing. And I basically still don't. I don't even do anything related to AI in university, but I'm really fucking stubborn. Point is, if you came here to learn the inner workings of AI and how every single bit of it works, then I'm not that girl, but I will try. You have to take everything with a grain of salt, and if I get anything wrong, please correct me in the comments. The first step to creating an AI was figuring out what type I needed. To start with, I looked up on the internet types of AI and saw what ones were publicly available. To make it easier for the user, many publicly available AIs are pre-trained. This means that they've been trained based on a huge data set of millions of images to be able to classify objects and replicate them through imagery. It's like how most people don't send primary school children out into the workforce because, they don't know anything, which is, definitely the only reason. A pre-trained AI, on the other hand, is like a high school graduate. It has the base skills to go out into the world and be molded for a specialized purpose. Many companies take pre-trained AIs and train them further to be used for whatever the company needs it to do, whether that's a more general thing like a chatbot or something that classifies things or data entry or anything like that. And yeah, I could take the easy way out and do this too, but many of my issues actually stem from this base training process. The datasets used for training are usually over 1 million images, which takes off a lot of electricity and water. How they actually come across these images is through web scraping, which is when an algorithm or an AI trawls through all of the websites on the internet and just takes data, whether that's images or text, to be used for training. The problem with this is that if you're an algorithm just going through and taking all of the data from all of these websites, you're not going to be crediting or even communicating or asking permission to take any of that data, which raises some ethical concerns for people who put their own work out there and don't need it to be stolen. Since I didn't want to use a pre-trained AI model, that meant I had to make one from scratch. How hard could that be? Oh my god. Well, low-key, not that hard actually. The reason that all of these pre-trained AIs take up so much electricity and power and time and all of these images is because they need to be versatile and up to professional standards. The thing is that since my AI is only going to be used for this one project and it doesn't have to have a professional capacity or anything like that, I don't actually need a huge data set, and I don't need to take up as much power, which means I can just use my own laptop. The model I ended up using is called a GAN, which stands for Generative Adversarial Network. A GAN is a model that trains unsupervised, which is really useful for my lazy ass, and it's made up of 2 networks trying to beat each other. The first, the generator, creates an image by shaping noise. The second, the discriminator, is then either shown the generator's output or a real image from the dataset, and it has to decide whether it's a real or fake image. They compete against each other, as the generator tries to fool the discriminator with its fake outputs. Typically, the generator's output will start off very noisy, as it has no information to go off of, and it's not really learning too much from the discriminator yet, as the discriminator has no idea how to tell anything apart. But eventually, as they keep working together or against each other and getting feedback from whether they're right or wrong, they'll hopefully start to learn at the same rate until eventually you get a really realistic image. For my dataset, I wanted to prove that AI doesn't need to use copyrighted imagery or web scraping or any of those sorts of controversial ways of getting data to actually work. So to do this, instead of stealing other people's work, I stole my own from a couple of years ago. This dataset, in terms of size, is actually really tiny and measly compared to the rest of the standards of the world. I mean, it's 12 compared to like millions for some of the top line ones, but I used it as my starting point. Now you might be wondering how I actually decided on using the GAN model. Well, it took me hours of research and writing notes, and I just looked up how to make an AI model from scratch on Google and just happened to pick one that was a GAN. And then of course I just, stole the code directly from the article. I'm a true programmer, guys. This is literally like what programmers do. I'm assimilating. And this ended up leading me to TensorFlow. TensorFlow is Google's free machine learning platform. And the download process was a real fucking bitch for someone like me who had no idea how to do any of it. I mean, I had to go into the console, I had to go into the terminal.
I found out that you couldn't even download it on Windows, the most recent version, if you wanted to use your GPU, and you'd need to use your GPU to get any sort of good results out of it. So I had to download an old version, and then I had to go and download a special console version.
It was a nightmare. Anyways, after installing TensorFlow, Python, and Visual Studio Code, I copy-pasted my way to a basic GAN. And immediately, shit was broken, of course, the life of a programmer. And because of this, when I actually started building my GAN, I turned to the experts. That's right, I used ChatGPT to host most, if not all, of my project. To be fair to me, I did actually learn a lot from this process. I used Miss ChatGPT as a teacher. I made sure to fact check and look up all of the shit that it told me to make sure that it was actually correct. And it seemed like it all was, because, it worked out. And then, thanks to Miss ChatGPT, I eventually started getting some outputs. Now, this may be the initial outputs, but things were already starting to look really amazing. And here it is, my first output. Oh my god, you guys are actually gonna be gagged. Like, y'all are gonna be gagged. Now, right, yeah, okay. Sounds like to me the video's over. Okay, fine, it's fine. I haven't started training it properly. That must be the issue. So, I'll just leave it on overnight. Yeah, this was taking way too long, okay? So I looked into the problem, and it turned out that my bot wasn't actually using my GPU, it was using my CPU, which is much slower. So after setting that GPU up, it turned out that there was another problem, and that problem was that my GPU was shit. It was way too shit to generate the things that I was trying to generate. And after looking into that problem, turns out that, maybe I was doing a little bit too big of a resolution, considering that most of the examples that I looked at for GANs, basic GANs like this, use around like 25 by 35 or that sort of resolution pixels. And my ones, to show you for comparison, were 1000 to 1500. So, it's about the same kind of size. So yeah, I had to downscale a lot. So I eventually settled on one that was working quite well and still pretty huge considering the examples, 250 by 375. Now this is where I started seeing real results, and a lot of them. It was generating things at a real rapid pace, and well, you can't really see any sort of actual figures or realism going on here. It's just abstract patterns. That's actually what I wanted from this AI, because I didn't want it to show just the corporate, generic, realistic things that people had set up AI to do. I wanted to show what it was capable of and a visualization of the way the world looks through AI if you don't actually train it to be able to recognize or replicate objects. I was just sending it my data and getting it to replicate it as best as can, and it couldn't do it very well, but I thought things looked pretty cool, giving horror vibes, to be honest. You could also think of it as a really extreme example of a lot of the things that you see on the more realistic looking AI outputs. A lot of times you'll see an AI thing, and the way you'll actually be able to recognize whether it's AI or not is by looking closely and seeing if you can spot anything that looks real at first glance, but as you look closer is just nothing. It's just nothing. They're just shapes that look vaguely realistic or vaguely like they work in the context of the image. Because the AI isn't actually looking at the context of the image, it's just looking at the examples and the data set that it's been shown and generating it based off of that. It doesn't know why those things are there, or why they should be there, when they should be there, how they interact outside of that one static image. Which means that you're going to see a lot of things that look correct, but at the end of the day are completely superficial. This is basically the extreme example of this, where it doesn't really look realistic at all at first glance, but it's like a blown up version where it's kind of trying to replicate things based off of what it's seeing, but it has no real understanding of the real world context or culture behind the image. So it's just giving you very abstract and almost alien looking things. Around now was when I began to brainstorm ideas for what could go alongside my AI outputs. I bounced around some ideas, but with all of them, I wanted to provide a juxtaposition between the meaningless abstract outputs of the AI and something that showed humanity and was full of culture or context or just anything that an AI of my level couldn't replicate. Eventually, while I was thinking, I realized, what's the opposite of a baby AI? A baby human. Okay, I ended up settling on that. But before this, I ended up discarding it as an option because I thought that having those like almost creepy horror imagery from the AI sitting next to some sweet little baby photos would just make people think the whole thing was about abortion. It's not ideal. As for the babies in the photos, I couldn't exactly use anyone else's because I didn't really know anyone with a baby, and I wasn't just going to walk up to the hospital and go like, hey, oh my god, newborn. Like, that's creepy. I couldn't do that. That was out of question. So I ended up using mine, shown here. I look pretty gangster, kind of a gangster bit. Like, I look like a thug in one of those. You can't tell me I don't look like a thug in that one. Once I had my baby photos, I edited them a bit and cropped them a bit. But something was missing. It needed something more. What I ended up doing was overlaying some fractals on top of the images, specifically a part of the Mandelbrot set. I thought this added a lot of visual interest and a lot of contrast, and it also brings you in a little bit, because if you just saw some baby photos, you might just say like, okay, kind of weird, kind of shit, what was the ugliest fuck baby, I don't give a fuck. But if you saw this weird kind of almost earthy and gritty pattern overlaid, it might pique your interest a little bit more. So now that I had some photos to go alongside my AI, I thought, well, now that I have some photos and I have an AI that generates things based on existing photos, why don't I just use those photos as a new data set? Because even though I was getting some really interesting patterns from my existing AI, they weren't all that visually interesting. It was just some patterns and some textures, and you couldn't really make out anything related to what it was based on. The reason for this is that the images I was using originally were really unclear and very varied considering their small data set size. With the new ones that I had, these baby photos, they were much more clear and they were much more similar, even though they weren't the same. So once I started using these as my data set, I started getting some actual forms going on. You can see some of the shape of the head coming through, and eventually you start seeing some what look like to be eyes and facial features coming through. And considering the AI doesn't actually know how to classify or replicate these types of things, it ends up looking really, really creepy. Like, okay, not me getting an AI to generate some demon babies, love that. And I was actually really happy with these. So I ended up using them as my finals and displaying them alongside my photography. Now, what's the point of all of this? Because at the end of the day, it's cool that I made some things with the AI, I'm proud of them, but they're not exactly realistic and you wouldn't find them being used as some sort of corporate branding. But that's the problem with AI these days. AI is a technological advancement that basically breaks us out of our box, and we're telling it to make things that we can already make. We're just trying to do it based off of efficiency rather than creativity. All the pre-trained AIs out there are made to help things be more efficient. They're there to help companies do things faster and people to get stuff done quicker. That's the whole appeal of it, is convenience. But why does it have to be? If you want to be an artist and you want to embrace this technology instead of hiding away from it like many others do, you don't have to follow the rules that everyone else is following when it comes to AI. Because this technological advancement has so much potential. You can basically tell it anything is true and it will believe you. You can redefine the rule set that it's using. You can train it to identify things incorrectly, and you can tell it to generate things that are fucking batshit insane, like my demon babies. As artists, we don't have to think about it as a replacement. We can think about it as a tool that we can use to break out of the box in ways that no one else could. The point of being an artist doesn't have to be to learn how to do a medium very well. It can be your skills in terms of creativity and the message you want to send to the world. AI isn't going to replace us. It's going to fall alongside us, and it's going to become another medium that we can use, because this sort of thing isn't new. We've had technologies before that have come in and completely rocked the art world, like photography, for example. When the first publicly available version of photography came about, daguerreotype, everyone was freaking out because they thought it was going to replace drawing, because you could produce these perfectly realistic captures from time and space in a way that people were already trying to do with drawing. And people were being very dramatic about it, even saying things like, "From this day on, painting is dead." And as you might be able to tell, it's actually not. It's still kicking about. And photography has settled alongside drawing and painting as another form of art rather than a replacement for it. This is how I think AI is going to turn out as well. But we have to go into it with the mindset of this. You have to be ready to embrace a technology and make it work for you. Of course it doesn't work for artists. It's not made for us. It's made for companies. It's made for efficiency. It's made for convenience. But why does it have to be like that? Why can't we make it work for us? If you're an artist and you're watching this and you've made it all the way through to the end, thank you, first and foremost. I don't really care if you like this. I don't really care if you subscribe. But what I do want you to do is go out there with a new, fresh perspective. I want you to realize that AI doesn't have to be something you hide from. It can be something you take control of and show the world that artists aren't going anywhere.